Hello, my name is Britney, and today I want to tell you the most frightening experience of my entire life. A few months ago, I traveled to Japan because it had always been my dream to visit that country. I wanted to see the beautiful temples, walk through the busy streets of Tokyo, try authentic Japanese food, and experience a completely different culture. I was excited from the moment my plane landed, and I had no idea that this trip would completely change my life. My first day was wonderful. Everything looked clean, peaceful, and organized. I spent hours exploring the city, taking pictures of colorful streets, visiting small stores, and tasting food I had never seen before. Every corner felt like a scene from a movie, and I couldn't stop smiling. As the sun began to set, I realized I had walked much farther than I expected. I wasn't worried because I had my phone with me, but when I looked at the battery, I froze. Only 2% remained. I opened my map to find the way back to my hotel, but the internet stopped working before it could load. A few seconds later, my phone turned off completely. I took a deep breath and told myself everything would be fine. After all, I was surrounded by people, and I only needed to find a train station. At first, that seemed easy, but after 20 minutes of walking, I noticed something strange. The streets became quieter. The crowds disappeared. Most of the stores were closing, and the colorful lights that had made the city feel so alive now made it seem mysterious instead. I stopped for a moment and looked around. That's when I noticed a black luxury car parked across the street. There was nothing unusual about it until I realized two men inside were staring directly at me. I looked away and continued walking, trying not to think about it. Maybe they were waiting for someone else. A few minutes later, I turned another corner and saw the same black car again. This time it was much closer. My heart started beating faster. I told myself it was just a coincidence, but something deep inside warned me that it wasn't. I changed direction and entered a narrow street filled with small restaurants. I hoped the crowd would make me feel safer, but when I looked behind me again, one of the men had stepped out of the car. He was wearing a perfectly tailored black suit and holding an umbrella. He wasn't running, and he wasn't calling my name. He simply walked at a slow, calm pace while keeping his eyes fixed on me. I pretended not to notice and kept walking, but every few seconds I could hear his footsteps behind me. The sound echoed through the wet street. My hands became cold, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I finally reached a busy avenue and quickly waved at a taxi. The driver opened the door, and I got inside without thinking twice. I felt relieved as the car pulled away. I showed him the address of my hotel, and he nodded with a small smile. For the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. I watched the city pass by through the window and slowly began to relax. Then I noticed something strange. The bright streets disappeared, and the taxi entered an industrial area where almost every building was dark. There were no tourists and almost no traffic. I leaned forward and politely told the driver that this wasn't the way to my hotel. He didn't answer. I tried again, speaking a little louder, but he remained completely silent. A cold feeling spread through my body. Then the taxi stopped in front of an old warehouse surrounded by empty parking lots. Before I could react, I heard several engines approaching. One black car arrived, then another, then another. The doors opened almost at the same time. Several men wearing black suits stepped out and slowly surrounded the taxi. I reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't open. It was locked. I looked at the driver, but instead he calmly turned around and looked directly into my eyes. For the first time since I entered the taxi, he spoke in perfect English. "They've been waiting for you." I felt every muscle in my body freeze. Waiting for me? That made no sense. I had never been to Japan before. One of the men walked to my door and opened it from the outside. His face showed no emotion at all. He bowed respectfully and said, "Miss Britney, our boss would like to meet you." I shook my head and whispered, "I think you've made a mistake." The man slowly reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out my backpack from only an hour earlier. He looked at me without blinking. There has been no mistake. At that exact moment, I realized something that terrified me even more than the men surrounding the taxi. Someone had been watching me from the moment I arrived in Japan. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The man was holding my passport, and I had no idea how he got it. My hands were shaking, and my heart was beating so fast that I could hear it in my ears. I wanted to run, but there were men standing all around me, and I knew I had nowhere to go. The man looked at me and said, "Please come with us. Nobody wants to hurt you." His voice was calm, but I didn't trust him. I slowly stepped out of the taxi, and two men walked behind me while another led me toward the old warehouse. The building looked abandoned from the outside, but when the large wooden door opened, I was surprised. The inside was clean, quiet, and beautifully decorated with traditional Japanese furniture. Soft lights filled the room, and someone had just prepared hot tea. At the end of the room, an older man was waiting for me. He smiled politely and invited me to sit across from him. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he pushed a cup of tea toward me and said, "You must have many questions." "I only have one," I replied. Why am I here? The old man nodded slowly. Because someone wants something that they believe you have. I immediately shook my head. I don't understand. I'm just a tourist. I know, he answered without hesitation. His answer confused me even more. If he knew I was innocent, why had his men kidnapped me? He opened a small folder and placed several photographs on the table. I felt my stomach tighten as I looked at them. Every picture showed me somewhere in Tokyo. One was taken at the airport. Another showed me eating lunch. Another captured me walking through a market. Someone had followed me since the moment I arrived. I looked at the old man and whispered, "Did your people take these?" He slowly shook his head. "No, our enemies did." A cold chill ran down my back. "Our enemies believed you were carrying something important. They hid it inside your backpack without you noticing, hoping we would find you before they did." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" One of the guards stepped forward and placed a small silver key on the table. "I've never seen that before," I said. "We know," the old man replied. "We believe someone slipped it into your bag while you were walking through the city." I stared at the key. It looked old, simple, and completely ordinary, but everyone in the room seemed to care about it. "What does it open?" I asked. The old man smiled slightly. "If we knew that, none of this would have happened." For the first time since arriving there, I started believing he might be telling the truth. Then everything changed. One of the guards suddenly ran into the room, speaking quickly in Japanese. The old man's face lost its calm expression. He stood up immediately and looked toward the entrance. "They're here." Before I could ask who he meant, every light inside the warehouse went out. The room became completely dark. A second later, I heard glass breaking somewhere in the building, followed by shouting and running footsteps. The old man turned toward me. "You must leave now." A guard grabbed my arm, handed me a flashlight, and pointed toward a narrow hallway behind the room. "Keep running. Don't stop, no matter what you hear." I hesitated for only a second before I started running. Behind me, I could hear people yelling, doors slamming, and objects crashing onto the floor. I didn't know who was fighting or why, and I didn't want to find out. The hallway seemed endless, but finally I reached a heavy metal door. I pushed it open with all my strength and found myself outside in a narrow alley. Rain was still falling, and the cold air hit my face as I ran without looking back. After several minutes, I reached a busy street full of people, restaurants, and bright lights. I had never felt so relieved to see strangers. I stopped the first police officer I could find and told him everything that had happened. The police searched the address I gave them that same night. But when they arrived, the warehouse was empty. There were no cars, no guards, no old man, no furniture, nothing. It looked as though nobody had been there for years. The police couldn't find a single piece of evidence to support my story. The only thing they couldn't explain was a small silver key that was still inside my pocket. I still have it today, and sometimes I wonder if someone is still searching for it.